Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello, everyone, rather. Hello. Welcome to
Hi.
the University of Salford documentary podcast. We are going to be covering lots today. If you all want to go around and introduce yourself, we've got Andreea, Tudor, Thomas Kirby, and Paul Diffley here. Should we start with you, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Paul Diffley. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I specialise in adventure docs, particularly climbing, mountaineering, occasionally make something else like a caving documentary. And I produce these myself and I sell them various channels. And I've been doing that now for about 15 years. I also do freelance work for and corporate work for brands and a bit of broadcast work as a camera op.
Very nice. Tom?
Very good morning. I'm Tom Kirby. I'm a lecturer on the film production course and with this particular kind of specialism in documentary, and I also make documentaries kind of alongside and kind of doing various work, kind of both corporate and broadcast as well.
Very nice. Andreea?
Okay, so hi, I'm Andreea. I am a graduate. I graduated in 2019, and after finishing, I went on to working for the university as part of the quality and enhancement office as a video content creator. But obviously, because of the pandemic, my contract finished early, and I moved back home in Romania, where I work as a video editor for a company. And on the side, obviously, I'm always trying to do documentaries because there's so much potential here in Romania regarding this type of content. And I did work on 2 documentaries during university. So, yeah.
Very nice. All very nice stuff. Should we move on to the first question? Let's start with how do you start? How do you look for your subjects? What are you considering when you're looking for your subjects? And how do you start? How do you plan the film? How do you go from there until you start rolling? Where do you find your subjects?
I'll say most of my films, I've made about 15 films, like feature-length docs, and pretty much all of those films, the idea has come from the athletes, from the climbers, from the cavers, from the mountaineers. I've never sat down and thought, oh, it'd be really good if I got a climber to go and do this, and then set it up and paid them. And that, I think, is quite interesting because that's very different to how a BBC doc would normally approach something. You know, they would say, you know, they'd have some idea about, oh, it'd be great if we did this, and then they'd get some researchers, and then they'd call up some climbers and pay them several £100 a day to go and do something, and they'd write a script ahead of time and do it. Whereas, that just, for me, that just loses all sense of authenticity. Whereas mine, these climbers are doing it anyway. They're gonna do this climb anyway. The fact I'm just there to observe and then tell the story of it, and that's a very different kind of style. And I think for me, that's always worked really well. It has produced some good stories, and they've always been authentic.
Yeah, it's interesting with climbing because there's early on, I'm going to drop the free solo film. I mean, there was ethics issues there with following something as it's happening, you know, before there's the film side of things there pressuring him, and it's where do you go from there? How involved are you as a film production team? It's an interesting one. Andreea, did you have something to say there?
Okay, so the principle that I go for and I went for when making documentaries in uni, for example, is obviously as filmmakers, we love telling stories. And some stories are better told in the form of a documentary because obviously there's a little bit of different approach and the impact is different. Well, I think interest, passion, and obviously desire to share with the world a certain story or type of event is what drives someone to get involved in this type of project. And obviously that's what happened to me, and it keeps happening because it's so interesting to show and to the world that story or event and get the reaction. And obviously depending on the type of documentary, there's certain things to be learned from it, or there's certain impact that you're looking for. So it's always looking about having that essence that will actually just show how good documentary is.
So you sort of start from an essence or an idea, and do you look for people from there, from that initial idea, and then you look for subjects to go with?
Yeah, that's what we did in university. We did one documentary in our second year, which was Keeping It Real. Basically, we wanted to, there was, I think, 5 of us. It was a really small team. And we wanted to look into this area of of filmmaking with celluloid film and the impact it had back then and how it is today, and trying to raise awareness to people about how interesting it is, and just show the difference a little bit about how it is today. So we just tried to reach out to people. Our producer Chloe Mullen, she did absolutely fantastic job about with finding people that would get involved, and were so nice. We did travel quite a bit around the north to find those people, but it was really interesting to see their views and their collections and the passion, because that's what drove the documentary, and that's what really drove us as well to get involved, because we're really passionate to find more about it, see the collections, and it was just overall lovely to get involved into it. And I think that's what makes a good documentary, is the passion. What you put into it is what you get afterwards.
That's interesting. Tom, do you start with a subject, or do you start with an idea and then find your subjects and your contributors?
I think I've worked on kind of a whole mix of different projects that we've worked kind of in different ways. So sometimes it's contributors and subjects have kind of come to me and gone, Tom, we're going to go do a display of parkour with JCBs in Paris. Do you want to come along and make a film about it? To which your answer is yes. So you kind of can come along and kind of, you get brought in that way, similar to the way Paul might kind of get brought into a project. But then other ones I do kind of, I'm looking at kind of what topics are around and interesting at the moment that might not have been kind of presented. Looking around on kind of like anniversaries, I always find are a really kind of good one to kind of start with. It kind of, are we approaching the 50th anniversary of something? Are we approaching the 100th year anniversary of something? And then starting to build an idea around that, because then it's a kind of an easier sell to commissioners as well with that idea, because you can say, look, 100 years ago, this big event happened. I want to go now and explore that. Or if kind of a big change is about to happen, trying to kind of catch that wave as that change is happening. It's harder because you've got to be kind of very much on your feet and as something might happen. But kind of, it's always having that kind of ear to the ground and reading articles and seeing what other people are doing. And sometimes I've taken it that I've found an article like announcing something. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then kind of kept following that down the line, and that's kind of then turned into a full idea. So it's kind of seeing as well what other people are reporting on and thinking, okay, is there something more that I can add a film? So to me, it's a real mix of different ways that ideas kind of come to me.
It's interesting, the idea of having a documentary there that has to be made at that time. You know, it's that time for that documentary to be made, and I think that's an interesting point. In is it the right time for this story to be told? Is this what I should be doing? Is the story that I should be telling? Which is moving on to this question, which is, do documentaries always have to be a factual, hard-hitting subject, or can you have light-hearted documentaries? And I mean, to me, the answer is yes, you can have light-hearted documentaries, but do they have the same impact?
I would say it doesn't really matter. I mean, as long as it has some impact, as long as it tells a story, has, moves an audience, generates some emotion, then whether it's serious or light-hearted is irrelevant for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Paul, that I think kind of this idea that kind of documentaries are kind of a higher level of kind of filmmaking, that it's kind of it's only there to kind of be something intellectually stimulating or something that raises awareness. I think it can be lighthearted, it can be entertaining. And I think the good ones, though, are the ones that do both, that are raising awareness about something and providing entertainment for an audience, that kind of fits that kind of magic kind of level when you think, okay, actually, I've been entertained, I've enjoyed this, but at the same time, I'm sat here going, hang on, what was that kind of being addressed in that topic? So that caused you to think afterwards. So to me, I think the best documentaries are ones that do both of that. And it isn't one that just because it's all sober and sensible, kind of, oh, great.
It's all sort of about a sort of subtext as well, isn't it? So it's looking for a documentary that's got another message underneath it. I mean, we all know how long it takes to work on a documentary from start to finish. It's you do inevitably have like some deeper meaning that you're trying to get through, obviously, from the surface level. So I do like the idea of having another level, even if it is light-hearted. You've got that sort of light-hearted subtext, deeper hitting subtext below. It's nice.
It's just the whole thing that documentary appeals to different types of people, but as Tom said, if it does both, also has a message. But if it's a little bit lighthearted and actually has a nice impact, then yeah, that works, and that means it's a really good documentary. And I have an example. I did work. It was the first time working on it after graduation. Within the Manchester Film Festival, there was a 40-hour challenge, and me and a couple of my colleagues, we decided to do a mockumentary. It was all new. We're like, we don't know what we're doing, but we just want to go with it and try to tell a story. It was supposed to be around a certain sentence, 3 little words, I think it was. And we decided to go, because we're in Manchester, with the bee. Why not go even more extreme? And we went for a guy that's absolutely obsessed with bees, and we named it Unbelievable. And it was quite interesting, being really lighthearted and looking, for example, at the other submissions, really heavy content, and we're thinking, you know what, let's just go with this, maybe we'll make someone laugh, why not? And yeah, that was it. It was an interesting new thing to try. So yeah.
That does sound quite exciting and interesting. 48 hours to make a mockumentary, that sounds pretty cool. Projects changing, how do you find that projects change during production? Do you find that you've had projects have a totally different narrative by the end of it from what you were starting from? Do you find that you've got new contributors? How have you found projects change?
I think with that, you've just got to follow the story, haven't you? You might make a plan. I'm not a big planner, actually. I don't do a lot of planning ahead. Maybe a page of A4 if I'm lucky. Mostly it's just in my head. But as you set out and the story develops, you just follow the story. If you were sticking to a plan, like a lot of broadcast documentaries would be done if they're produced by a broadcaster, they might not have the freedom to follow a story. But because I'm it's all my own time. I'm not paying day rates normally for camera operators, or it's all my own expense, my own time. So I have the luxury of being able to follow a story, and that's really nice. So yeah, you might plan a film, but once you start filming, you've just got to see where it goes, explore, go down a few rabbit holes.
Yeah, I think kind of you've got to be kind of in that state of flexibility through a whole project, that kind of even when kind of the phrase you make a documentary at least 3 times, kind of once in pre-production, once in production, and then once in post-production, when each time you're kind of carving it in different ways and thinking, oh, let's go down this way, and then you do a day's filming and something your contributor says something and you're like, hang on a minute, like I didn't pick up on that. And so the next time you're filming with them, you kind of go, right, can we explore this topic again? And then that leads you down. And then you kind of, in your head, you're building the film as you're kind of filming it. And then you kind of get into post and then you kind of bolt it together. And you're like, no, this doesn't work, does it, this way? I need to put this bit earlier or this bit later. So I think you've got to be, as a kind of a documentary filmmaker, particularly like happy to be agile and on your feet and kind of throw things in the bin if it doesn't work. And if you think, right, that bit's lost, but that's okay because I've gained this bit. So I think there has to be a flexibility in you as a filmmaker. And of course, there's sometimes in broadcast work, there's very much, this is the story we want to tell, and you haven't got that space and capacity, or you've only got, you kind of hired in, it's like you're here for 3 days. In that time, you've got to film everything. And then you might get like a day of doing voiceovers kind of as an edit. And that's it for the storytelling. You're like, fine, that's what I've got to work with. But I think if you can give yourself the time in a project to let it breathe, to explore it as it goes along, I think that can lead to kind of a lot more interesting things happening. The documentary Undefeated, which follows a high school American football team and kind of them through a whole season, the 2 filmmakers kind of had this idea of, let's follow this team for a year, and kind of embedded themselves in the school, knowing that they've got the narrative arc of a football season kind of there, but the stories that and the actual characters that they found within it, they only really kind of discovered kind of 6 months into filming, 7 months into filming. And then in the edit, we see things out of order. So we see things that happen a lot later, kind of chronologically, early in the film, to introduce us more to a character because it's in that scene. So I think you've got to have that kind of willingness to actually think, okay, we need to have this bit of information earlier. How can we put that in to then later on in a film, kind of something else might make more sense to an audience. So I think you have to be flexible in that.
Interesting as well, how much time you get with the contributor can change a documentary. Like you say, you might be massively limited in the time that you have with these people. You might have a day or two, as you say, with a contributor, and that might not give you much time to sway things. It's always a risk, I think, if you go out to a contributor and they don't say the right things, or say the things that you need for your narrative. It's always a worry. Do you find that projects change for you, Andreea, as you're working on them?
I did a lot, actually, on both of them. The one with the celluloid film, and then in the third year we did a documentary involving the racing society in Salford. So the Salford Racing Society, we named it Traction, and just like with the one with the football, like that Tom said, we just sat there for a couple of months and just waited for them to have certain meetings or anything that was interesting that was happening. We just went there on the whim, maybe like 2 days notice, and we were all just ready to go. And I think, it's about that flexibility and having an open mind and just knowing, okay, we got this really good bit, we might need something else here, but at least we have it, and trying to work out. It's almost like a puzzle, like jigsaw, just shifting them around. And for people that like to visualize it, I think it's a really good idea, and we did try that as well, just putting post-it notes on the wall and just trying to work with them and see, okay, this works here or not, just have to bin it. So it's about the flexibility. And we never know what might happen. We may get a really good day, we get a really good bit. Some days might be, okay, we get something, but at least we can use a bit of B-roll, which is really important. Like B-roll is, you can never have enough B-roll, too much B-roll. So
Nice. I've got a good question here that says, should you only be creating documentaries in an area that you're knowledgeable on? How important is it to know yourself about your subjects and the content that you're putting out?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, that. I mean, I'm a very much a specialist filmmaker. You know, I make lots of films about climbing, so I do always work in the area I am in mostly. The caving film I made a couple of years ago, I know it's still kind of adventure. It's a completely different subculture. The caving culture is very much underground, if you will, but and it's different sort of people. They have different objectives, different personalities, and a whole different language. You know, so. I went into that very much knowing very little about caving and having to learn it along the way. And I think that helped me then translate that story to the public. And I know, obviously, you're making these films. I'm making these films not for cavers, because if I made a film just for cavers, then I'd sell about 20 copies, you know, because there's not that many cavers out there. So you got to translate it to a general audience. I mean, maybe like an outdoor audience, you know, people who enjoy going into the mountains, or who go to mountain film festivals, but not just cavers. You can't narrow it too much. And by being an outsider, you do have that different view on the world, and you can translate that to the public. But I think what's important, if you are in the outsider role, is that you do rely on your experts, on your contributors. Send them a draft and say, does this look okay? Because you also don't want to alienate the actual core audience either. Like a caver watched my film and said, that's stupid. Why have you shown that bit of rigging? That doesn't make any sense to any caver. Then you've lost something. So I think if you are working outside your area, you've got to kind of consult with someone in the area.
Yeah, I think obviously for yourself, you've got a lot of climbing content, adventure content. I think once you're dealing with sort of more sensitive issues and you've got someone who's not in the know, maybe creating it, I think that's probably where there's more of an ethical issue there. But there's a huge rise in this naive presenter character. There's this new All Gas No Brakes. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's this series where this American guy in his 20s, just goes around to all these anti-mask protests, all sorts of just like crazy events, and he's just there playing this naive, bumbling, crazy presenter that's just kind of like shocked by everything, and it's like nothing is taken seriously. And I think Louis Theroux does that as well. I mean, his naivety when he's presenting, it's put on, but it's how much does he actually know? How much is he probably aware? Probably a lot more than he lets on of his subject and the ethical issues that he's putting out there for people to be seeing and judging. I mean, have anyone else had any issues where they feel like they don't know enough, or they're happy that they've done that extra bit of research, flipping it the other way?
I think research is really critical for a doc, that if you are going into a topic or a subject field that you're not knowledgeable in, you do need to be putting in that kind of extra work behind the scenes, kind of finding out as much as you can about the topic and the subject. Because I think kind of if you go in just purely with that kind of, I know nothing about this, I'm only going to show what I find, there's going to be points where you are going to miss things, or you're going to be speaking to someone and they're going to allude to something that, because you don't know all of the detailed background or the kind of subculture that you kind of go into, you'll kind of think, oh, hang on, what was that? And I think Paul's right with like the climbing subculture, they've got a whole different language. But then if you look at like Spellbound, which is following kids at an American spelling bee, that this is a competition where kind of 7-year-olds get up in front of a camera and go, right, spell this really long, complex word, kind of head to head with each other. And the filmmaker that went into that, again, he wasn't himself a kind of professional speller, if you can be a professional speller or a professional kind of competitor in it, but he had to kind of go into that and find out, started talking to people. And I think that's the big thing. The more you start talking to people in the documentary as well, and the more you kind of show an interest in them, then they're more willing to kind of share back to you as well, that if you actually can engage with them. That a great tip I always had about kind of filmmaking and interviewing is, before you sit down for an interview with someone, have a drink with them, whether that's kind of a cup of tea, a pint in the pub, or something else. If you're in kind of another culture, sometimes when it's kind of like, right, drink this, you might be sat there going like, what is this? But that's kind of their welcome to you. And in that welcome, you can start to kind of break down barriers that they've got. They can start to think, oh, hang on, this person isn't just kind of coming in as this this kind of white savior that we've kind of seeing heavily criticized in the media at the moment. And I think we do need to address that. But then on the flip side, like as you mentioned, Louis Theroux, I think the greatest of doing that, the slightly bumbling Brit, is actually Nick Broomfield. That in his approach, like, he clearly is a far smarter man, and when you read his writing and kind of listen to him in interviews, then he presents himself on screen. But he deliberately kind of acts in that more provocative role to get the response that he wants from from the audience, or from a contributor who he knows is putting on an act. He uses that to kind of break it down. So there's a doc called The Leader, the Driver, and the Driver's Wife, which is about a white supremacist in, can't remember where it is, but he's kind of like this, presents himself as this big military leader, and through the whole film, Nick Broomfield's trying to get an interview with him to kind of get to break down kind of this image of who he is. As he's like, he presents himself as a very nice guy, but actually he is kind of quite a terrifying man who's had kind of many people killed. So Broomfield is there kind of about to go to an interview with this person, and deliberately says to Barry Ackroyd, who was his DP, like, let's not go now, let's be late. And they kind of deliberately kind of like, no, let's have another cup of tea, let's kind of thing. And Barry Ackroyd, who was cinematographer, was like, this man is like a killer, like, we need to go now. And Broomfield's like, no, let's go late. And then they kind of turn up and film that arrival. And the arrival is Broomfield, oh, sorry, we're late, we kind of got our time wrong, like, we're here now. And it was in that moment they caught Eugene Blanche kind of giving the reaction that they actually wanted from him. But they needed that knowledge of all of that background of, this is the image that he actually was, to then be able to in that moment go, yes, we need to do something to provoke that from him, rather than kind of just thinking, oh, this is the image he's always presenting to us, that must be the image that he is all the time. So I think having that research and understanding is a really useful thing to have throughout a project.
No, I liked that. I liked the idea. I haven't seen that film myself. I don't know. I've seen a lot of Nick Broomfield, but I've not seen that. It's interesting in the thought of how having that control and that influence as the filmmaker over your subjects, you know, you can lightly influence them, and can you steer them a certain way? How ethical is that, to be steering your contributors towards a certain direction to get what you need? I mean, obviously, sometimes it's for the purpose of entertainment. Sometimes you need them to hit certain points. But how ethical is it to be trying to influence your subjects to act a certain way?
I don't think I do that much. I would definitely question that. I like to. I do. I don't know. I think I read very early on in my career. I read a book on observational documentary. I can't remember who wrote it now, but it really connected with me. This idea of just observing what's happening and not interfering with it. And I was quite strict about that. I wouldn't even shoot kind of reconstructions. Everything had to be shot for real. So normally you would film. You film someone at the crag, you might say, "Oh, let's just reshoot you putting your shoes on," and I wouldn't do that. So if I wanted a shot of someone putting their climbing shoes on, I would have to be there as they're putting them on. Now, I mean, my approach is completely softened, but I'm still quite strict on not interfering. I still like to observe. I'm always worried if I interfere, then I've changed the story. But what Tom was describing there is different though, because he's not trying to change the story. He's trying to get a reaction, and I think I'd actually be too scared to do that. From what you say, that'd be quite a bold filmmaker. So, but yeah, I see that is ethical. But trying to steer someone to make a different decision, that definitely crosses a line for me, and I wouldn't do that.
It is a grey area in terms of ethics and docs, and those ideas of representation and presentation. That in a film, I don't think there's one formula which I say, this is what I'm going to do for all of my films. I'm going to this is my mantra. Each topic and each subject, I think, okay, what is going on here? What story am I telling? How is my relationship with the contributors? And then building from that. So the parkour one with the JCB team was very much observational, because that's the level of access that we had to observe, and we could follow them quite freely in the performance space where they were. But at the same time, we couldn't say, can you just do that again, or can you do that? Because we were capturing all the rehearsals and then the live performances as they were happening live. So we didn't have that flexibility. So we had to be very much right, this is happening, we need to get this shot here. And there was times you missed shots. So you were doing a rehearsal and you missed them doing a particular jump, and you thought, right, I missed that. Next time I'll make sure I get that. So you're almost waiting for it to happen. And for that one, but then for other ones, when I've been wanting to tell a story or present a particular narrative, I do know, right, I want my subject to talk about a particular element of things. So I'm quite happy to ask them a question of right, tell me about the time this happened, or can you explore this with me? And I don't think that is shifting the bounds of ethics for that particular process. So I think it really depends project by project how you do it. And I think different filmmakers draw that line at different points. That I think Louis Theroux, Michael Moore particularly, I think his line of provoking someone is far further down the line than it might ever be for me. But that is very much his mantra and his style of, that's what I want to do. I want to go into the world and start poking people and seeing what happens, rather than the more I want to see and observe people. So I think there is a really fine balance. And again, I think it depends what the person you're filming is doing. And I think if they are climbing or parkour or anything of that danger where they themselves are in danger, you wouldn't say to them halfway up the cliff, tell me how you're feeling right now, as they're in the middle of a complex move or they're about to do something, because that just wouldn't be safe thing. And you've got to think about, what situation am I putting my contributor in here? That yes, I want to keep myself safe, but I want to keep them safe as well. So you've got to be thinking, okay, I want to ask them about the experience of climbing that route, but I'll ask that later in an interview, or even just in that reaction as they get to the top and they're safe, or they've just abseiled down or something. So you can catch them in those moments. But I think there's times when you've got to let your subjects be your subjects and act and perform in that space that you've given them, and then just be capturing that.
So I was going to say, expanding on that, I think it's really important to remind them that it's a really safe environment and they can just act natural. Because obviously with the interviewee, they're always going to have at the back of their head, I'm being interviewed right now. It's a little bit more pressure into it. So having that, space where they can relax and reminding them, it's okay. We're just having a normal conversation, whatever the topic is about. yeah, it's really important offering them that opportunity to just relax and not think, oh, am I going to say something that's not going to be good? Because I think that's how you don't get necessarily a good natural reaction or certain answers to certain questions. And that's what happened to us as well when we had all the interviews. And some good ones that we also got was after we finished recording, because we started having conversations and yeah, just figure out that how to create that environment when it's all relaxed and yeah, we can just work together.
I mean, I've done several interviews. You do like an hour-long sit-down interview, and it's okay. You turn the camera off, and then suddenly they say something amazing. You know, that happens all the time. You know, because and sometimes I've then turned the camera on. So I've just got one more question, and then try to capture it. You know, and you don't quite get the same magic, but sometimes you get something usable. But I mean, there are lots of techniques to try and draw people out and say more than they want to. That's maybe an ethical thing as well. But I mean, the classic one, of course, is just to remain silent. You ask a question, they give you the prepared answer in their head, and you just stare at them like that. And if you don't say anything, they just start to feel awkward, and then spill the beans about what they really think. You know, so that's just one technique. There's other ones, of course. And as Tom said before, you know, creating that relaxed environment first, that social environment with the cup of tea. You know, and because most people haven't been interviewed that much as well. Often depends who you're working with, whether you're working, you know. But a lot of people haven't been interviewed that much, so it is quite a foreign environment. So make it as relaxed as possible, and also making sure I like to do interviews either just with one other person, like one person on camera, and then me sat by the camera, and then you know everyone else who's in the property out of the room, you know, completely. So it's a nice, cozy environment, maintaining eye contact. Not talking much, obviously, trying to get them to spill the beans, you know, spill their heart.
Yeah, I think it's different with different styles of documentary as well. I mean, obviously Michael Moore's not going to want to sit his contributor down and make them feel comfortable, is he? It's obviously different for different styles. I think we've gone for two different ends of production there. You've got a nice sit down interview where you want the audience to be relaxed, you want your subject to be relaxed, you want the crew shooting it to be relaxed, and then you've got this other end where it's sort of this big moment's happening, let's get an interview now, let's do it now. And it obviously they're two totally different styles. I've got a question here sent in about styles, and what are some of the different styles of filmmaking that you've used? I mean, how have you explored different genres within documentary? Have you used different styles of shooting documentary? Anyone?
I remember when I first started, my first couple of films pretty much had only actuality footage on it, maybe with a little bit of interview, and that was it. But as I've developed, I've definitely tried to just vary what you put on the timeline as much as possible, both in terms of audio and visual. You know, there's so many options. Film's such a flexible medium. You know, yes, you've got your actuality, you've got your interviews, but you've also got, you know, you've got archive video, archive stills. There's animation is so powerful as well if you can get some budget to do that. And I did some recently. I think I paid £600, and a friend of mine in Manchester created just a few, maybe like 30 seconds of animation, but also gave me the stills behind it so I could animate it myself. So I've probably got, I don't know, 3 minutes of animation in my film for £600. So it's just quite good value for animation. But it's easy to forget that you can actually create stuff to put on that timeline. You don't have to just shoot it, you know. I'm also a huge fan of, I have made a few films where the contributors died. Well, you know, the person I'm telling the story about is dead, but most people leave an archive of written work. So you can bring that to life with an actor. Again, if you've got an actor friend who record it properly, and that's been really powerful for me as well. And then things like sound design, music, you know, there's so much you can do with that. So I think it's very easy just to think you just have to shoot your footage on the production days and then make the film out of that. You know, it's much more flexible than that. You can put anything on that timeline, and the more varied it is, the richer it feels as a film.
I think to me, it really depends, kind of project by project, how I'm shooting it and how I'm wanting to tell this particular story. So for some projects, I do like kind of having a very kind of visual kind of storytelling side of it, that we kind of went in the kind of more towards what kind of some might define as kind of poetic style of documentary. So it was a lot less kind of traditional observational footage of here's somebody going about doing something, but it was more kind of capturing the landscape and the coastlines that we were looking at and kind of exploring that. So when we were, the whole planning of it, we knew we wanted to make it as a real kind of visual kind of essay to the coastline and the formation of, as kind of like they're now building like a coastal path all the way around the UK. And it was kind of meant to be kind of a visual kind of poem almost towards that we had some interviews in from different people, but we really wanted to kind of capture the landscape from every angle and in ways that were kind of rich in themselves. So we thought, right, we're kind of dragging kind of cranes and jibs down onto beaches, kind of finding people that owned a boat and went, look, you own a boat, can we come on board that and sail on that for a while? Begged and borrowed and finally managed to find someone who had a plane that we could fly, because this was before drones when we were shooting this. So the idea of aerial cinematography was like this rare thing. We thought, no, let's try and find some. It's one shot in the film, and it's the one shot in the film now that I wish I'd edited out, because it didn't kind of give me that. But it was kind of, the aim of it was kind of, I wanted to capture the coast from every possible angle to show it to an audience, rather than just kind of being, here's a wide shot of a beach. I thought, no, let's really kind of go to it. So for that one. But then for other pieces, so I did a documentary about Rab Carrington, and for that I wanted the interview to be really kind of sharp and smart. So we spent time kind of thinking, right, where should we put this? And we kind of found a set that was kind of very much right, we want to have this as a set. We kind of got in particularly kind of more high-end cinema cameras to shoot the interview, lit it, we kind of did test shoots to kind of really have it. So it had a real kind of, when you look at the interviews in it, you're like, wow, that really kind of pops out. It isn't just kind of somebody kind of sat in their kitchen telling me about something. But that was the whole style, because it was him telling his life story. And I thought, I want it to be someone like us, someone sat down to tell their tale. So I thought, let's really set that up. But for other pieces, if they're out and about doing lots of stuff, the kitchen is the perfect space to kind of chat to them in. So, and for that one, kind of, we're a lot more kind of basic kit, very much kind of lightweight and handheld, following them around and capturing interviews almost just as they were busy kind of doing stuff. So there wasn't a sit down interview in that project. Everything was all interviews on the fly. But that was because that was the style we wanted. So I think you've got to kind of think about, what is the story I'm wanting to tell, and what way can I tell it in the best way? What medium can I use? And I think Paul's spot on. Like, don't just think about observational footage. Think about archival footage. Think about, you did it really well in keeping it real, Andreea, like where you had them like loading the projectors and all of that extra kind of material that you deliberately went out and shot separately, but then could be edited into the piece. I think you've really got to think about it kind of project by project, and what resources as a filmmaker am I going to use on this project to tell the story in the best way.
Yeah, it's true, because it was really hard to try to get footage, like archive footage, because we had almost zero money or anything that we could use to contribute to it. So yeah, that was the method that we used. And it was really interesting as well, because seeing the footage and all of those old films that the collectors had, it was just a really nice thing to be part of, and just sitting there with them, dimming the lights. One of them had a really small like cinema in the back of his house. And one guy, David, he had, I think, almost the biggest collection in the north. He died, unfortunately, next year. So, but he was really passionate about it and was just trying to show us everything. Even had, he said, some old BBC footage that just really hard to find, some old episodes, some really old shows. So the whole experience of getting to see that, and the collectors having those, and trying to see how we can incorporate this footage into our documentary, was what we tried to go for. And yeah, we had at least, I think, 5 hours of footage to go through, but it was worth it. It was worth it in the end. So yeah. It's about the narrative as well. And for example, that was just, we knew what we were going to, with. We had the interviewees, we had all collections, the passion, trying to showcase and raise that awareness about this topic. And on the other hand, with the other documentary, it was more linear, and we knew we had milestones. So we had, it was, they were trying to build a Formula One car for the competition that was happening in summer. So obviously the end goal was to have a finished car. So we knew we had that. So that would be the end of documentary. We already had that from the get-go. We knew, okay, that's the end. But what we have until then, a certain, I don't know, midway where the car is almost finished, certain parts arriving, certain interviews where we try to do updates. And I think the fact that the leaders of the society appearing on screen, and you could see a little bit of difference in the way they, I don't know, they look, how tired they are, for example, more into the project. It's what just brings up the documentary, and just working with that and having that linear sort of narrative and going with it. So yeah, that's what we went for on ours, for example.
That's interesting about a project over a long period of time. Paul and Thomas, have you shot anything over sort of longer periods and experienced any kind of difficulties or anything interesting that you've gained from shooting over a longer period?
I started making a film end of 2015. It's called Whiz Kid. It was supposed to be about a young climber from Edinburgh, a guy called William Bosey, who was 17 at the time, and how he's a young hotshot, becoming to one of the best climbers in the world. And I'm still making that now. So it was supposed to be a 1-year project, but it's kind of turning into Boyhood. So, but I'm hoping I might finish that this year, which created problems for me in that I just want to finish it, because although I've done other films in that 5 years, I've made other films, because this has been in the back of my head. It's kind of taken up too much space, I want to just get rid of it and then have a full brain again to focus on it. And the reason there are reasons why it's dragged on. Like, I just need him to climb this one more route, and he just keeps falling off it. And he's been training for the Olympics, which he didn't get in, and that was taking up all his time, so he wasn't focusing on the actual climb I wanted him to do. So it's dragged, and also it's weather dependent as well. So this route's it's in the Peak District. It needs to be between roughly about 10 and 14 degrees C for him to climb it, and low humidity. It needs to be dry. He needs to be there. I need to be there, and try to get all those factors to work up. It's just, it's been quite difficult to make that happen. I don't know. I suppose there's value, isn't it? If you make these films over a long time, then you get to see the change. Like, he looks like a boy when he's 17, and now he's 23. He looks like a man. So there's you're getting that for free, I suppose. That's the benefit. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
Is there another ending you could do to put yourself out of your misery there?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, that obviously, if this was like a commission, then I would have finished it a year ago. I finished it 4 years ago, because that was the original plan. You'd have so many days shooting, and you have to deliver at a certain time. But because I have the flexibility, it kind of keeps on going,
Interesting. Tom, have you had any longer projects that you've struggled with in a similar way, or that you've enjoyed?
Similar to Paul, I think I get to a project, like some point with a project, when I'm just like, I just want to kind of get rid of this thing. I just want to kind of get it out of the edit suite and kind of into festivals, and for people to see that it can bubble on. And kind of, for sometimes, like, I've hit problems where, like, in the Rab Carrington one, like, we had the massive problem of a major crux sequence of the whole film was meant to happen in Patagonia and kind of Argentina and kind of Buenos Aires and things. And I'm like, I have no budget to go out to this place. And even then, this is meant to be in the 1980s. So we had to kind of stall production as we tried to find kind of ways to recreate that in a way that we could do in budget, locally, and kind of still have that same effect. And eventually we managed to get there with it. But it did kind of have this massive roadblock in kind of the project of, we need the sequence shot somehow. How on earth can we do it? For other ones, I think generally kind of that year length is about the length I kind of aim for with a project in kind of that cycle, because then you've got that cycle, you can get it out into film festivals.
So you had a year-long project with the F1 car, Andreea. Have you had anything longer than that? Or was that year-long project? Did you find that was enough? Did you find that you explored enough with them?
See, that's the funny thing. The project is still not finished because the car wasn't finished in time for the competition. And it's still a bit on stall thinking, okay, how can we work with that and trying to find a good ending to it? Because they still went to the competition in Silverstone down south, but they just didn't have a running car. And we do have that footage. It's just still waiting, and that's mostly on me because I'm the editor as well, and thinking, okay, how do we find a good ending to it and make it like not that, oh, they actually didn't make a car till the end, and yeah, just figuring that out and having it on stall while other things are happening at the same time. But that's what happened, and it will get finished eventually, because we're all still excited about it. And who knows, because it happens every year. The team might change a little bit, and there'll be another car maybe this year, next year, and maybe you'll be working. So you never know. You never know.
Moving on to signing off. Thank you very much to all of our guests. Don't forget to check us out on our socials at UOS Film Production on Instagram, UOS Film Production Podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, on all your favourite podcasting platforms. Send in your ideas too. We love to hear from the people who care. So let us know what you want to see, and we will see you all next time. Thank you very much once again to Paul Diffley, Tom Kirby, and Andreea Tudor. Thank you very much.